You can't reverse holes in your brain. We should be approaching it, dealing with it, educating young women and mothers. By 2080, we can expect half of all children to be severely neurodevelopmentally impaired. You've diabetes-proofed your diet and lifestyle. You've heart disease-proofed your diet and lifestyle. The average woman in the EU is going to spend 14 years of their life unable to climb 10 steps.
In the previous episode, we've talked to Professor Ben Bickman about how running the brain on ketones is a great way to prevent Alzheimer's. It's certainly something that I've tried to incorporate in my diet. The more I stay in ketosis, the more I'm looking after the brain, in particular trying to avoid Alzheimer's. We've also heard from Sean Baker, we've also heard from Anthony Chafee about how the importance of a meat diet is good for the brain. But I wanted to take that a little bit further. I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into this, and I thought, who better to speak to than Patrick Holford? He has dedicated so many years studying the brain. He has an organisation that helps test people to see how likely they are of getting Alzheimer's. And I wanted to ask him questions about what can we add to our diet, what nutrients should we be looking for to really help prevent the onset of a disease that many people think is in the genes, but as you're about to discover, probably is not. I'm with my good mate, my good buddy, who many of you will know, he's written 46 books, Patrick.
This is the 47th now.
47 books in virtually every language you can imagine. And it's a pleasure to have you.
Good to see you, Steve. I love your new book.
Good, but I don't want to talk about my book at the moment. We'll talk about that later. Let's talk about your new book, Upgrade Your Brain.
I have had an amazing last decade working with literally the world's leading professors from China to America, Harvard, Washington, California, all, and what's fascinating, all experts in one thing. And I'll give you an example of this. Like in America, top professor on omega-3, Professor William Harris. And he's done so many studies that show basically the more omega-3 you have, the better is your memory, the larger is your brain. It's literally as simple as that.
Yep.
And but the thing is, for omega-3 to be bound into your brain is 60% fat.
Yep.
Everything we're hearing and speaking right now is going through this omega-3 network.
Yeah.
For it to actually be there, you need B vitamins.
Yep.
And B vitamins, I'm sure we'll talk about, is to do with something called homocysteine. So anyway, this brilliant fellow developed a test which measures, a pinprick blood test, your red blood cell membrane level of omega-3, DHA, EPA. And I said, do you ever find, Bill, that someone has the same intake from fish or supplements, but a different omega-3 index score? And he says, yeah. And I said, have you ever thought it might be because some don't have enough B vitamins and therefore can't bind it in there? I said, totally logical, never thought of it. Because the other professor at Oxford has spent his career doing the most extraordinary work on B vitamins, you know, and homocysteine. So the point is, and you know our lovely friend, Professor Robert Lustig, you know, he's gone a mile deep into sugar. So, you know, they've all gone a mile deep into their area of speciality. And what I've had the honor to do is, they're like the masters, I'm like the jack of all trades, is to learn...
You're not jack of all trades, you're a very good mouthpiece, because what a lot of these professors do, they are absolutely, there's a few exceptions, but most of them can't explain it in plain English.
Exactly.
And that's what, in all your books, it's the references to science, to data, to researchers is on virtually every single page in your book, which I have read cover together, by the way, which I think is brilliant. Therefore, I've got millions of questions, hence you're also here. Is you put it in plain English so we all understand it.
And when you put the pieces together, that's the magic of this book. And it's exactly what we're doing at the charity. When you put the pieces together, I mean, the outrageous thing, I don't know how it was for you, but when you read for the book, you learn that if you eat, you know, less sugar and more fiber, so on, you halve your risk. And if you have omega-3, you halve your risk. And if you have the B vitamins, you halve your risk. And before long, you think, God, I could eliminate my risk many times over. And that's the point. Because all of these studies have looked at one thing and its effect. And no one has looked at all of the things. And I can say right now, it is my personal belief, based on the science, that 99% of people can completely eliminate their chances of developing Alzheimer's if they make some relatively simple diet and lifestyle choices, probably starting from their 50s. And, you know, what actually happens then, we've now got the data, no one's seen this, is that when you do, I mean, I'll give you an example. Like one guy, right? His wife keeps finding him in different rooms at night because he cannot find the loo in his own house. Anyway, obviously they go to the doctor, they're referred to a memory clinic who run a cognitive function test, which is how you diagnose dementia, and a blood scan to diagnose Alzheimer's. He's diagnosed with mixed dementia, which is Alzheimer's and vascular.
Right.
She says, what do we do? And they say, nothing. 6 months later, they're trying to enroll him in some terrible drug trial. They find our charity, foodforthebrain.org. They do the cognitive function test, which is a digital and free version of what you can do. They do the questionnaire. They make all the changes. And this was so from December to now. Now he's remeasured. His cognitive function has improved dramatically.
Fantastic.
He's planted his whole spring garden. He's back on the computer.
Gorgeous.
And now, you know, I don't want to over-exaggerate that case because it was too late in the day. We want to get in there earlier.
Yep.
But, you know, you really can do so much. That is the point. Now, having tested 400,000 people on
this is on your site.
And the test is a bit like a test for diabetes in the sense that it was developed to be able to diagnose who's got dementia or pre-dementia, which is called mild cognitive impairment. So if let's call pre-dementia orange or amber and dementia red. So what happens in the green? Nobody knows, but we do. And what I'll tell you is every year from the age of 18, cognitive function is declining. It's extraordinary. So you can literally draw a line. So I'm telling you that a 35-year-old is worse than a 30-year-old, who's worse than a 25-year-old, who's worse than a 20-year-old. And next one of our projects is to look at 5 to 17-year-olds. But the point here is, you imagine this line that's falling, and most people, when they sort of hit 85, are going into the mild cognitive impairment phase, and then, you know, when they're 90 or so, whatever. So we end up with 1 in 6 with Alzheimer's. Now, what if you could... Let's not even talk yet about flattening the line, which I think is possible. But if you just could move it up. So what's happened is on our questionnaire, where basically if you're doing everything wrong, you get a dementia risk index of 100%. And if you're doing everything right, you get a dementia risk index of 0%. And we've split people into the quarter lowest, which is good, which is green, and the quarter highest, which is red, which is bad. Now, those people in the green, already doing the right kind of things, their cognitive function also declines in relation to the ages of people we have. But their line is so much higher up that if you plot it, they will get Alzheimer's when they're about 290.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. That's what I wanted.
Exactly.
So, look, few things. Straight away, for those that are watching that don't know this, there will be lots of people watching this going, well, I thought Alzheimer's, you either just got it or you didn't. You're talking about prevention. We're going to pick up on this in some depth. Next thing I want to say is that in the last 6 months researching the book and having all these professors and doctors talking to me and interviewing, some haven't, you know, some we've put out already, some we haven't on podcasts, that it's fantastic. There seems to be a consensus around the world now that virtually, not just Alzheimer's, but virtually every condition around the brain, from bipolar to epilepsy to ADHD to anxiety to depression, stop thinking about it as a brain condition, start thinking about it as a metabolic condition, and at least, even if you don't completely go it's metabolic driven, at least consider that in the diagnosis and the prevention. And that's fantastic, because what you've just said, get your vitamin B sorted, get your homocysteine level sorted from your vitamin Bs, omega-3s, DHA, all that sort of stuff for the brain, being prevention.
Cut out the sugar.
And cut out the sugar. Cut out the sugar. Up your fibre.
I'll tell you funny, Steve, on this tour I've been doing in Ireland, a couple of places were quite upset because one of my chapters is, well, it was going to be building young brains and preventing neurodivergence. They say, oh, you can say that. And some of the posters, people say, oh, you can't say that. So what's going on here is we're normalizing, like, it's happened with obesity to some extent, but we're normalizing Alzheimer's like it's just what happens when you get older. And now we've pulled sort of ADHD, autism, and various other things all into a bundle. We call it neurodivergence.
Mm-hmm.
We are neurodiverse.
Yeah.
Everyone is different. It's to be honored and enjoyed. But most, not all, with neurodivergence have a condition, a health condition, which is unpleasant. And they get stressed and they get anxious and they can't interact socially and they can't concentrate and they can't sit still and they have gut problems and they have all sorts of problems. And we're sort of normalizing this like it's something, despite the fact that it's gone up sixfold in, probably 10, maybe 20 years.
Yep.
So in other words, not genes, because it's gone up. The genes haven't changed.
Yep.
So we're normalizing.
It's like cancer, isn't it? People go, oh, it's genetic.
It's just normal.
Sorry, how can it be genetic if 100 years ago it was 1 in 20 and now it's 1 in 2?
Yeah.
Come on, genetics don't change that quick.
So I wrote a piece recently called Neurodivergent or Neurodeficient because, I took the very symptoms actually reported by America's CDC, Center of Disease Control. Not everyone likes them. And they've been very heavily pushing vaccines, and they've got a tremendous amount of patents on vaccines as well.
In a bit, remind me, I want to talk about vaccines.
Yeah, I know, it would be good. But I just took their list of symptoms and then put beside it the studies. I'll give you, an outrageous example here. If a mother is deficient in vitamin A, the child can be born, and sometimes this is permanent, with visual problems that mean that they have to look out of the sides of their eyes to get the most visual information. So some autistic children will not look you in the eye because they've actually got a visual problem, and they kind of pick up information in the periphery. Now, the good news is for some of these kids, when we give them vitamin A, retinol, and by the way, omega-3 DHA, those are really what the eye is made out of. Cod liver oil has both. They start looking you in the eye.
Wow.
And some of them, they've said to me, like, now I can see my feet and my hands, or my hands and my arms at the same time. Wow. So what we're talking about here is a maternal deficiency that affects fetal development that results in a problem which in some cases can be improved. Unfortunately, in some cases, is a disability. We should not be normalizing this.
Yes.
We should be approaching it, dealing with it, educating young women and mothers. And like you say, it's extraordinary how the same factors pop up with all these mental health problems. So, behind me, you kind of see this image of 8 factors.
Yep.
We're talking about sugar, glycemic load, antioxidants, B vitamins, brain fats, healthy gut, active mind, active body, sleep and calm, which is stress and sleep. And actually, that's what's driving everything. So the wonderful side effect, if you read Upgrade Your Brain, for the purpose of dementia-proofing your diet and lifestyle, you've diabetes-proofed your diet and lifestyle. You've heart disease-proofed your diet and lifestyle. You've cancer-proofed your diet and lifestyle. So it's just win-win all the way. And then the only problem is, because I know you're a young man just in your 50s. I'm in my...
I'm glad you say that's young, because that's my approach. Because if I'm going for 120, that means I'm still not halfway there yet. So
so I'm sort of getting closer to 70.
So you need to get to 140 then. That's great.
Exactly. But the thing is, the one problem that happens if you do everything in your book and my book and eat the right food and so on is, what do you do with all this extra energy? Because you wake up pumping. You wake up, your mind is clear.
Yeah.
You feel great.
Yeah.
And so that is the only real, significant downside or side effect if you really do all this, is you're going to have a lot more energy.
I tell you, let me give you an example. Alan. So Alan, I'm at my tennis lesson the other day, and on the court next to me, this gentleman comes up and starts knocking a ball around, and my coach Gavin says, Steve, do you know Alan? I went, oh, I've been a member for 5 years. I don't. He said, no, he doesn't play this time of the day normally. And he said, Alan, come and tell Steve what he did yesterday. And I went, oh, come on, tell me, Alan. He went, no. And I thought, a bit grumpy. He said, Alan, tell Steve what he did yesterday. He said, well, I lost my temper and I threw my racket into the net. And Gavin says to Alan, and why did you do that, Alan? He said, well, this young kid I was playing beat me. And Gavin, you gave me a lesson the week before and it was a shot I should have got to. And then he said, and why was yesterday an important day for you, Alan? He said, it was my birthday. And he said, and how old was you, Alan? And he went, 91. Right? And this guy did not look 91. Yeah. And lots of things came to mind then. He's active, he's physical, he's doing a sport, still competitive and having lessons to get better. I mean, that's what life's about.
I'll give you a nice one on that. And it feeds something very, very significant. Professor Michael Crawford, right? A little bit of background there. In the 70s, he analyzed many species of animals and the fatty acids in their various organs, liver, heart, brain, so on. And of course, liver, fatty acids, they vary depending on what they eat and where they live, except for the brain. The brain of every single animal to date, mouse to hippopotamus, dolphin to human, every single brain in every single animal is principally two fats. The main one, omega-3, DHA, very rich in fish. The second, omega-6, arachidonic acid, ultimately from plant foods, also in meat and milk. Extraordinary finding. Anyway, and we'll talk about that. Now, I was sitting having tea with him the other day, and no one knows to date how the photons, the energy that hits our eye, turns so rapidly into what I'm seeing in color as you and so on. And he solved it. He's about to turn 94. It's quantum physics. Yeah. It's all to do with DHA. Of course, it's theoretical, but I'm sure he's correct. He's sure he's correct. And you know, it's a bit like Einstein going equals MC squared. It takes a few years to do the studies. But he's 94 and he's done it. But here's something that'll blow your mind, and it really drives it home. It all goes, Darwin was a supremely bright fellow, and he worked out there are only two forces driving evolution. One, natural selection. Two, conditions of existence. And that's where nutrition comes in. And he said of the two, in every single thing he wrote, conditions of existence is the more important, because it isn't until the conditions of existence change that certain species become dominant through a process of natural selection. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if humans urbanize everywhere, there are some species who can't deal with it, maybe badgers, and there are others that can, like foxes, and they become dominant. So natural selection always follows conditions of existence. Now, what actually happened historically was the imperialists, the aristocrats, loved the idea that they were naturally superior. And then, of course, Hitler loved the Aryan race, idea, and the whites loved the concept that they could be superior to the blacks. And then along comes genes, and everyone goes batshit about genes and still goes batshit about genes. We know genes has so little to do with cancer, and sugar has so much to do with cancer, and we've forgotten about the conditions of existence. Now, here's a cruncher, because Michael Crawford says, in 1901, to get into the British Army to fight in the Boer War against the South Africans, a man had to be 5 foot tall. In other words, the industrial age diet, where they'd learned how to refine flour so that not even a weevil could live off it, and hence they could store it. They'd learned how to refine sugar. Yep. The gruel, the food of the industrial age diet, they didn't know about protein. People had shrunk. In a very short period of time, people had shrunk to 5 foot. Now, this figure isn't quite correct, but in the early 1900s, as we discover protein and go to work on an egg and the good British breakfast and all that sort of stuff, by 1950, men have basically gone from 5 foot to 6 foot. That is how fast epigenetics works. That's how fast a change in the environment works.
And let's just pick up on that, because people just say you contradict yourself. You didn't contradict yourself. Epigenetics is totally different to genetics. It's the bit on top.
It's the effect of the environment on our genome.
Yes.
you know.
I just want to get that clear. So
yeah, it's what washes across your genes.
Yes.
It changes everything. The environment is way more important than the genes that you inherit.
Yeah.
And this shows. Now, what he's saying is we're doing right now exactly the same in reverse with our diets a million miles away from the diet that we evolved to eat, wild foods, without the omega-3s, without the B12 that comes with that, you know, with a lot of empty calories, which means less nutrients, less zinc, less magnesium, less chromium, and all the rest of it. And, you know, he basically says by 2080, we can expect half of all children to be severely neurodevelopmentally impaired.
Wow.
And I mean, literally, it's like the sixth extinction of man if we don't change, because what happens is the average IQ, which is falling 7% a generation, falls. We can see it already in our politicians. and
where did you get that 7% from? Is that some fact, or you?
Yeah, no, it's a fact. I mean,
our IQ is going down and down that quickly.
Our IQ is falling by 7%. Our actual brain size, Homo sapiens brain size, peaked at about 1,700 grams. Basically, a chimpanzee has a 360-gram brain and has the same genes as us, 1% different. And their brain has stayed the same 6.5 million years ago. Something else happened in evolution, which we know why. And it led to an almost 1,700-gram brain. So big change, right? Now, today, the average brain size is 1,330 grams. In other words, in the last 20,000 years, I think when we started farming, you know, we went from hunter-gatherer along the water's edge with a lot of seafood. Our brain size has shrunk by 20%. Since the 50s, our IQ is falling by 7%. Mental illness is going through the roof. Last year, the Children's Society reported a tripling of children referred for mental health problems in the last couple of years. And what's actually going to happen is we have less social connection, more aggression, less intelligence, less ability to cooperate, less ability to solve the other problems we've created with, you know.
And of course, they're telling us that our kids have got more social interaction than ever before, because they can speak to their mates from school all night long on the computer. And I'm like, that is not social interaction. And people go, no, it is. But you can't have empathy via a screen. You can only have empathy like this. And therefore, it's absolute bullshit that they've got more social interaction.
And all these wars and things that have happened in the past, you know, some clever diplomat manages to broker a deal with the two sides, and you start to, you know, make things work. And that's what we need, and that's what we lack. You know, that's what we lack. And the more our mental health goes downhill, the more problems. Did you know God has a blog?
God has a blog?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's called,
I did have you can tell me about that in a second. I just did have a think a minute ago about chimpanzees and human brains and the fact that theirs is getting bigger. Maybe Planet of the Apes is going to happen soon. Maybe they will take over.
I think we're heading that way.
It's possible.
And it's a bit like when you think of, like, you know, the crazy apes throwing things and all the rest of it. We're going to get, you know, into a state of real, you know, distress.
Yes.
That's the truth.
Let's go back. Oh, you tell me, 30, 40 years ago, you wanted to prove this thing about B vitamins, and you went to a school, if I remember right, in Wales. Everybody said you were mad, and you went, no, I'm not. This is right. Yeah. And you even had the courage or the audacity, or let's just say the balls, to bring the BBC along to film it. Tell everybody about that.
Yeah, well, I just started. I mean, basically, I had an aha moment in the early 1980s. And it came about through studying the work of a genius professor, Linus Pauling, 2 Nobel Prizes, 48 PhDs, and a man called Dr. Abraham Holford, genius psychiatrist, head of psychiatric research for part of Canada. And I suddenly had this outrageous idea that maybe all these diseases like diabetes and heart disease and dementia and so on were being driven by suboptimum nutrition. So I decided to start, I'm early 20s, the Institute for Optimum Nutrition, and Linus Pauling was my patron, along with another lovely man who got lead out of petrol, Professor Derek Bryce-Smith.
Oh, wow.
And we started to offer training to be a nutritional therapist. This is how that profession came into existence.
And ION, still going today.
ION,
I think that's the one I've just
Nutrition.
I've just become a patron, I think.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
No, I mean, they're doing fantastic work, and it's the first degree accredited training in nutritional therapy. By the way, the logic there, you may or may not know, a lovely Dr. Stephen Davies, who started nutritional medicine and the Journal of Nutritional Medicine and all the rest of it. And he said, this is science, right?
Yeah.
So all doctors should be doing this. And I said, yeah, the trouble is it takes years to study. And I agree with you, they should be, because it is evidence-based. But I don't think it's going to happen like that. So let's create a new profession of nutritional therapists who can work with doctors.
Yes.
So doctors have to know about and refer them on. So that was the purpose. And we've now got 10,000 nutritional therapists.
Well done.
Now, one of the first students was a lovely man, Gwilym Roberts, from Wales, who was the headmaster of a secondary school. And all my students...
So back to the experiment now.
Back to the experiment.
Okay.
And all the students had to do a project.
Yeah.
And we were chatting. We thought, maybe if we gave an optimal amount of vitamins and minerals, we didn't really know about the essential fats in those days, we could have an effect on IQ. So we ran a little pilot trial, and sure enough, we got a change. So we then thought, we need to do this properly, randomized placebo-controlled trial, large enough, long enough, etc. And maybe I should bow out and we should get a professor who thought we were nuts. So we found a highly respected professor of psychology, David Benton, lovely fellow from Swansea University. He thought we were crazy. There's absolutely no way giving a multivitamin pill. This isn't a regular multi, it was a high-dose multi, versus placebo is going to do anything. And I challenged the BBC. I said, film us, because if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and if it does, it does. And we invited the Lancet Medical Journal to publish the results. And when they broke the code at 7 months, they'd had a 10-point increase in the IQ on the vitamins and a 3-point on the placebo, which was a 7-point difference. A 5-point difference gets half of all children classified special educational needs back to normal. And I'll tell you something interesting here was we actually, BBC Horizon did their program 2 days before it came out in the Lancet. And we had 2 days of absolute flack from dietitians, doctors, etc., saying nonsense, nonsense, nonsense. Just kept quiet. Came out in the Lancet. It's never been criticized. We had Medical Research Council statistician. It was an immaculate trial, never been criticized. Hit the front page of every newspaper, every TV channel, and that was in 1987. And that was the beginning of the waking up to the idea that what you put in your mind affects your... in your mouth affects your mind.
Yeah. Isn't that fascinating? Two things to pick up on there. First of all, people do question the Lancet. I mean, it is the Bible, and people do question the Lancet. Certainly their Eat Well report that came out a couple of years ago, which I questioned and have written about and have been very critical about. So for you to put something out in the Lancet, even though it's like the Bible of what's happening in in nutrition, medicine and health, it's not infallible. So the fact that nobody questioned it, I mean, that's fantastic. You're in the most reputable paper, magazine, stroke, nutritional, whatever, and then the BBC put it out 2 days before. And then, if I remember right, it's vitamins sold out in virtually every single shop across the UK for about a week or so till they could replenish. But then what drives me nuts is, like everything in life, then it gets forgotten.
That's the way it goes.
You knew that back in the 80s.
Yeah.
Isn't that frustrating?
It really is. And, the reason I'm now putting the total focus on Alzheimer's is because you can't reverse holes in your brain.
Yeah.
I've told you a story about somebody getting significantly better, but still the holes are there.
Yeah.
It's too late. So there isn't another option. And in case you don't know, the Office of National Statistics in 2022 said it is now the number one killer. So it's the number one killer. It's by far the biggest health care cost.
Yeah.
Brain diseases, including Alzheimer's, cost more than all of cancer and heart disease combined.
And it's bloody horrible, mate. My mum's got it. My mum can't speak. Bless her.
And
she can't speak. It's horrible.
Yeah, it's you don't want to have this.
And it's frightening. And I don't think I've ever fessed to you before.
Yeah.
I've got the APO4 gene. I've got a mother who has got Alzheimer's, and we've talked a lot about nutrition. That's why I try and stay in nutritional ketosis as much as I can.
Yeah, I mean, you will be fine with the ApoE4, and omega-3 is very important. I'll tell you something about the ApoE4 gene as well. But you really don't want it, and it's preventable. And it's not reversible, but it's preventable. There never will be a drug because it's actually a multi-system thing.
Well, if we are right that it is predominantly a metabolic condition, like every metabolic condition, in my mind, you can never treat it. You can probably slow the symptoms and you can make it a bit easier, but there's very few drugs that can make you feel better on a lifestyle-created disease.
Yeah, as Rob says, you know, it's foodable but not druggable.
Yeah.
In a sense, I'll challenge the metabolic thing in a small way,
okay,
just to sort of broaden the horizon there. Actually, I'll tell you a funny story, and some people will know who I'm talking about. Others will have no idea. Dr. Fritjof Capra, back in the 70s, wrote a seminal book called The Tao of Physics, and was one of the first systems-based thinkers. And I was 15 at the time, and we played tennis together. And he said to me, Patrick, what is the difference between you, an animate object, and an inanimate object? And he said, you've both got parts. The parts relate, like chain to the wheel, etc. But the difference in an animate object is there's this life flowing through it. So what we soon realized is there's 30 known risk factors for Alzheimer's, from hearing loss to cataracts to exercise to smoking to pollution to head injury to B vitamins to whatever, and
lack of B vitamins.
Lack of B vitamins, risk factors, yes, absolutely, and also drugs, not lack of, but things like omeprazole, the antacid drugs, the metformin also. Mm-hmm. That if you understand there is the structure of the brain cell, the neuron, and already we know the omega-3s a vital part of that structure, but need the B vitamins to be fixed into place, so to speak. There is the function, and that's where we could say metabolic, because the function, a bit like an engine, you need the right fuel, be it glucose or ketones. You need to mop up the exhaust fumes, which is antioxidants. You need things like fiber to slow release the fuel. So we say that area is metabolic. But then you've got to use the neural network. That's the activity. Yep. And that's where if you're part blind with cataracts, or you can't hear, or you spend time watching shit TV that doesn't make you think, and you have no social interaction with people who can challenge your ideas, so you have to keep thinking fast, you need all three. Structure, function, utilization. So I'd say the metabolic bit is largely in function.
Yep.
There's a few other bits too.
Yeah.
Which is the exercise. Of course, you'd say exercise. Yeah. And of course, exercise is so vital. And in fact, muscle mass is one of the best predictors of brain mass.
Really?
Yeah. And my lovely professor, associate professor Tommy Wood at University of Washington, he's got great big muscles. I'm thinking I need to get a little bit on this because I don't really do that. But the point is, as soon as you're stimulating blood flow through exercise, it's blood flow to the brain. Mm-hmm. So you need the flow of blood to bring the nutrients into the brain and so on. So there are a lot of ways, exercise we know stabilizes your blood sugar, and muscle cells can absorb glucose. Yeah. So a lot of people go, I'm not eating any different to how I was eating when I was 30, but the weight just piles on. Yeah. And the answer is you've lost all your muscle cells. Yeah, yeah. If you've got no muscle cells, there's very little of you that actually needs glucose. So the glucose, as you know, and say so beautifully in your book, the insulin takes the glucose, if it's not needed, into storage as fat. Yeah. So the name of the game is build muscle, stop eating sugar and refined carbohydrates. Yep. Never eat food that doesn't have fiber in it. Yep. And I know you've been adding fiber. Glucomannan fiber is the most exquisite soluble fiber. Yep. And also have carbs with protein. That really helps to slow release them. And then you feel fantastic.
Amazing, amazing. So a couple of things you've touched on in your book that we haven't really talked about yet, and I think there's a load of confusion about it. You write it well in your book. You can just say, well, tell people to read the book if you want to. But I think it'd be a good teaser for the book, the Upgrade Your Brain. In the most simple, plain English, explain what homocysteine levels are.
Homocysteine, yeah. So it's a blood test. And it's the most important blood test, that you need for your brain. In essence...
You don't take it from the brain, though?
No. You
take it from anywhere, can you?
Yeah, it's in your blood, homocysteine.
Yeah.
In effect, if I sort of put it this way, how on earth does your body keep adjusting? Like you eat a biscuit, you make insulin, how does that happen? Fire alarm goes off. In 0.2 of a second, you're pumping adrenaline. How does that happen? We hear about genes can be turned up or down, genetic expression. How does that happen? How do you make serotonin when it makes you feel good? There are all these processes going on. And the answer is they're all done by a process which is called methylation. And there's about a billion methylation reactions every 2 seconds in your brain and body. Now, methylation depends on B vitamins, mainly vitamin B6, which is in whole foods, B12, which is only in animal foods, very rich in seafood and eggs, and folate, foliage rich in greens. So if you don't have enough B vitamins, you can't do methylation. And what immediately happens is
Is methylation a bit like enzymes in a sense?
It actually drives a lot of enzymes.
Okay, so stage before creating enzymes.
Yeah, I mean,
wow.
I'll give you an example like a gene. I mean, this is quite good with the ApoE4. So ApoE4, for those who don't know, maybe 10%, possibly more percent of people have this ApoE4 gene. And technically, if you've got it, your risk of developing Alzheimer's is about 5% higher.
Is it only that all?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
It's just that.
I thought it was like 2 or 3 times higher.
No. What happens is, this is the cheat of what we call absolute or relative. So your risk of getting Alzheimer's is about 5% higher.
That makes me feel better already.
Exactly.
Somebody has screwed the difference between absolute and relative.
Yeah. So the point here...
To try and sell something.
Yeah. The point... Yeah, exactly. The point is, not many people get Alzheimer's anyway. Yeah. So, your risk of getting Alzheimer's, when I said 1 in 6 over 90 get it. So already your risk is, 1/6. So it's like your risk is 20% or less, 15%.
Well, luckily I've done your test and it's looking quite low at the moment.
So your risk, might be 15% or something, right down there. With the ApoE gene, my risk might be 11%. Right?
Yeah.
So the difference is only 5%.
Yeah.
But if it goes 11 to 15, you go, oh my God, I'm a third more likely.
Using absolute rather than relative.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the way it works. Now, here's the interesting thing.
According to Malcolm Kendrick, he's interviewed 500 doctors, not one could explain the difference between absolute and relative. Yeah. And yet they prescribe drugs on that very calculation. Yeah. And the statin one, they go, statins can reduce your risk of a heart attack by 50%. Side effects, 0.15%. When the reality is it's completely the opposite way around.
Yeah. No, I know. And it was a bit like, I don't know the exact numbers on this, but on the original mRNA COVID vaccine, right, they had a whole lot of people mRNA vaccine and a whole lot of people not. I mean, thousands. It was like 10,000 in each group. And one died in the non-vaccinated group and none died in the vaccinated group. So relatively, you could say it's 100% better.
Yeah.
You reduce your risk of dying by 100%. But what's actually happened...
Can I just put that in plain English for everybody? I can double everybody's chance of winning the lottery right now. I can double it. I guarantee you. Speak to me after this podcast, and I guarantee I can double your chance of winning the lottery. In fact, I'll tell you right now, just buy 2 tickets. Not
exactly. It's the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So then, of course, in all the good studies, they've measured ApoE4. So if you're doing a study on healthy diet, you're doing a study on omega-3s, you've got your 2 groups, placebo and control. Or the placebo and the group that, let's say, are getting omega-3 or a better diet, whatever. And of course, you have to know, what age are they? Do they smoke? Do they have ApoE4? So you're making the 2 groups similar. Mm-hmm. That's controlling the variables. Yep. So they've all measured ApoE4. So I just go in and look at all these studies. Like there was a very nice one last year in the British Medical Journal, 29,000 people. And they found that those who had a healthy diet and lifestyle were 11 times less likely to develop dementia than those who hadn't. But they've all got ApoE4 status. So I just went through all the big studies and say, okay, 11 times less likely. Was there any difference in those who had ApoE4 than those? And there's no difference. So I describe the ApoE4 gene like a weak light shining in the darkness will increase your risk by 5%. But as soon as you shine the strong light of changing your diet or exercising or taking omega-3 or B vitamins, you can't see the effect.
Yeah. Great.
So what happens is genes are turned on or off all the time. And this is why, like the BRCA gene, which if you have the BRCA gene, you've got a 50% chance as a woman of having breast cancer, which means half don't and half do. So you ask, well, why yes, why no? And the answer is milk cranks up the BRCA gene, and soya specifically cranks down the BRCA gene. So how do you turn genes on or off? Literally, you add a methyl group. It's CH3. Never mind the details. But so they're these tiny little things called methyl thingies.
Yes.
They're like little Pac-Man, you know.
Yeah.
They're doing the work in your body in an exquisite... I mean, your homocysteine in a Swedish study predicts a child's school grades. You literally, you can literally predict who's top of the class and who's bottom of the class, right?
Wow.
And now, I mean, to give you an example, we have just at the charity cracked how to measure it relatively inexpensively and accurately on a pinprick blood test. We got kits that we send to people.
Yeah.
As soon as we did that, my wife and I, we sent off our sample. Now, above 10, you have accelerated brain shrinkage. Mine was 7, hers was 15. You know, we're both in our 60s. Most people over 65 are in the brain shrinking zone. Now, it was a bit of a shocker to her. I take 2 strips of vitamins every day. And if you asked her beforehand, she says, oh, I only take 1. I don't think I could deal with having the energy that Patrick has. But she's been.
I've asked her about living with you, and
yeah, we know about that. But it's so she's upped her game.
Yeah.
And in 2 months, she's brought her homocysteine down to 8.
fantastic.
Now, to sort of broaden it a little bit, in a study of healthy young women, homocysteine tested before they got pregnant, those women who had a homocysteine above 9, age 6, their children are more socially withdrawn, have more aggression problems, more depression, more anxiety, more problems at the age of 6. So when you hear you've got to have folic acid when you're pregnant, it's because it's necessary for methylation and lowers the homocysteine.
So just so I've got this absolutely right.
Yeah.
Methylation is a good thing.
Yep.
Too high a homocysteine
Is a bad
is
thing.
a bad thing. It affects methylation.
It's the direct indicator of whether or not you're doing methylation. So if you turn around to me and say, Patrick, do I need to supplement B vitamins? I say, don't ask me, ask your body. If your homocysteine is above 10, you need to supplement. And for most people, what happens as they get older is their ability to absorb vitamin B12 becomes much less. Yeah. And it's not about what you eat in that case. It's in meat, fish, eggs, and milk. A lot of people over 60 need to be supplementing B12.
Yeah.
Cheap.
Explain to me why, and I should know the answer because my clinic that I own do B12 injections. I thought the body couldn't store B vitamins at all. That's why you had to have it daily. But I've also got another company I own that does B12 injections. How does that work then if you can't store it?
You can store some B12.
Oh, you can? Okay.
Yeah. And that's why you can have a monthly injection.
Yeah.
So you get a bit of storage of B12 in the liver.
Got you.
So you don't get an immediate, effect. Yeah. What's been very encouraging, the RDA is 2.5 micrograms. The RDA stands for ridiculous, dietary, arbitrary. I, with a normal homocysteine, I want to supplement 10 micrograms. That's what I would say is optimal for anyone. It's a good idea. But if you have a raised homocysteine, you probably need 500 micrograms. In other words, 200 times the RDA. Now, what's very good news is we've learned that in almost all cases, not in all cases, even people who absorb it poorly, if they supplement much more on a daily basis, which is cheap and safe, you cannot overdose on B12, it's just as effective as injections.
Brilliant.
And injections, by the way, bypasses the stomach where B12 is absorbed. One of the reasons why the antacid drugs, which are handed out like Smarties, which stop you making stomach acid, like omeprazole, they're called PPI antacids or proton pump antacids, 4 years use increases your risk of dementia by 1/3. Because they stop you making stomach secretions without which you cannot absorb B12. Metformin, which is generally the best drug for diabetes, We, of course, know how to reverse type 2 diabetes, so you don't need metformin. Metformin also inhibits B12 absorption. So anyone out there who's on metformin or on omeprazole must have
Megadose.
their homocysteine checked. That's vital.
Yeah.
And then just to sort of throw this one in, if you happen to live in Europe or in Japan and you had a B12 test, because doctors can but don't test your homocysteine, can and do test your B12. And if you lived in Japan or in Europe, if your B12 was below 500, they would correctly say you are deficient. But in the UK, the reference range is set at 180. It's wrong. And you've got brain shrinkage happening in people with a B12 between 180 and 500. So deficient means not efficient. And if this lack of a B vitamin is making your brain shrink at an accelerated rate, you're clearly deficient.
Just let me get that right. In Europe and Japan, 500, the more you've got, the better. So at 500, they're saying you've got a problem. But in the UK, we don't recognise it as a problem until you drop
below
to 180 or below.
It's a little bit like we've seen the optimal level of vitamin D change.
Yeah.
It wasn't so long ago that when the HbA1c, glycosylated hemoglobin, which you talk about in your book, used to be, it's a percentage of red blood cells that are damaged.
Yeah.
It used to be that if 7% or more were damaged, it's diabetes. That's now dropped to 6.5%. 6% is we call pre-diabetes now. Actually, we see brain shrinkage above 5.4%.
Right.
So these reference ranges are sort of, to be an average poor health, you have to be above X.
Yeah.
But Steve, you and I, and our books are very clear about this, we're not interested in being average.
Yeah.
We want to be optimal.
I say when it comes to RDA and, how much of these vitamins and this and that you should have, it's like the minimum wage. And who wants to be on the minimum wage? You aspire for more, don't you?
No, you're totally right. And what we've done at the charity, which is a sort of game changer, because foodforthebrain.org, you can go there freely, do the cognitive function test, then you fill in a questionnaire. It works out your risk, what's driving your risk, tells you what to do. But we've now introduced a pinprick blood test, 4-in-1, it's called DRIFT, Dementia Risk Index Functional Test, measures your homocysteine, measures your HbA1c, the blood sugar thing, measures your omega-3 index, and measures your vitamin D. So now you can actually see what's happening in your body. So you might say to yourself, because we're always fooling ourselves, I don't think I got a problem with sugar or carbs. Okay, I have a bit of a sweet tooth, but, et cetera, et cetera. I drink fruit juice, it's good for you, isn't it?
Really?
I have a banana on my cereal, it's high in potassium, isn't it?
Is it?
I go out to have a takeaway meal and go, oh, that's a lovely sauce, et cetera, et cetera. You're fooling yourself. So why not ask your body? Because the honest truth is it's the only thing you were ever born with.
Yeah.
Everything you enjoy happens through your body. Yeah. Treat it with a bit of respect. So simple pinprick blood test.
Why don't we do that? It's your eternal home, and yet we paint and decorate and look after our homes, put a new roof on, we've got a problem. Even more, our cars, warning light goes off in the car, my God, you panic like crazy for ages. And I say, why don't we do that at body? Mother-in-law goes, I'm constantly getting migraines. I'm going, she goes, it's not important, so I'll just lie down for a day. And I go, Mum, it is important. Let's find a way of getting rid of it. It's a sign.
If you follow it down, ultimately, there's only two drivers of disease. One is ignorance, you don't know, or you don't want to know, and the other is addiction. And very often we don't want to know because we are addicted to sugar or alcohol or coffee or whatever it is. And the thing that really strikes me is right now, the average woman in the EU is going to spend 14 years of their life unable to climb 10 steps. And we've seen it in elderly people. And you think, shit, they got to live in a bungalow or have a stair, thing. Yeah. And, they're hobbling around on a frame. And you think, terrible, I don't want this. But you don't think it's in the genes. You think, bloody hell, I think I need to keep my muscles strong when I get old. I need to do a bit more walking. I need to keep my,
So people do think it's in the genes. So I'm gobsmacked. They do think it's in the genes, Patrick, because I've come across people later and I say, well, I'm going to help you do this. And they've got on your book. Who wants to live that long? I'm going, And that was a foreign concept to me.
Yeah.
I get people coming up to me going, well, I don't want to live longer than that. And I go, and I'm like, what a foreign concept. But then when you start digging down deep and ask them, well, why don't you want to live to 120? That's my goal.
Yeah.
Oh, because I'll be in a wheelchair by about 70 and I'll lose my marbles, my brain. I'll go, but it doesn't have to be like that. So I was surprised to come across groups of people, lots of them en masse, going, well, I don't want to live much longer than, say, 60, 70, 80. But that's because they think it's inevitable that we're going to... I mean, you know, if we were to look at my mum and dad, you know, my dad, bless him, loved them both to bits. I was there yesterday, loved them. But dad's got type 2, struggles to get out of a chair. Mum's got Alzheimer's to the point she can't even talk anymore. And her hips have gone because her doctor years and years ago convinced her not to go out in the sun, so she's had no vitamin D for like 40 years. She puts a bloody balaclava on whenever we go out. I mean, it's just, well, used to go out.
No, I mean, it's a shock.
And you look at that and you go, yeah, you're right. I wouldn't want to live older. I wouldn't want to live to get... I don't even... They're 84. I don't even want to get to 75 if it's got to be like that. But it doesn't have to be like that.
No, I mean, the bottom line, you know, is you don't need to lose your leg ability. You just need to exercise and keep them strong. But the same is true with the brain. Alzheimer's is not, you know, it's a preventable disease. It's a disease. You don't have to get it. We are the architects of our brain's future health. It's as simple as that. Dr. Abram Hoffer, he was the other guy with Linus Pauling that got me started. He treated 6,000 schizophrenic patients successfully. I was studying schizophrenia, and that's how I got into this. And I remember seeing his double-blind controlled trials, which were the first ever in psychiatry, jumped on a plane, went to meet the guy and said, how many people have you treated with this megavitamin therapy? And he said about 3,000 at that point. And I said, what's your success rate? He said 85% cure. I said, I've never seen a cured schizophrenic. You need to define your terms. He said, free of symptoms, able to socialize with family and friends and paying income tax. Now that I had never seen, so I became his student. Now, in his early 90s, I saw him at a conference and I said, Abram, you're limping a bit. You're hobbling. He said, do you know, Patrick, when you're in your 90s, it becomes harder to maintain your muscle mass, but I've got myself a personal trainer booked for when I go home.
Fantastic.
Anyway, mid-90s, 2 weeks before his death, he stops seeing patients. 4 days before his death, he says to his best friend, I'm not feeling very well. 2 days before his death, he checks into the local hospital. They cannot find any diabetes, heart disease, cancer, dementia, any disease as such. And in the last 48 hours, his organs slow down, pack up. He dies with no pain, with no drugs, with 2 weeks off work, with his mind as sharp as a razor until the very end. That should be normal. What we are witnessing.
And for people that don't know him, then you just look at our Queen. I mean, we don't know what happened in the last 2 days.
Yeah.
But look at that. She was still, you know,
right.
meeting people. Theresa May, if you remember, to the week before. Maybe it was her fault. Who knows? But yeah, she was good to the last minute.
Totally right. That is normal. What we are seeing is abnormal.
Yes.
We are literally digging our own graves with a knife and fork.
Oh, I like that. I like that. We're digging our own graves with our knife and fork. That is so true, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So true. Wow. Mate, your book, fantastic. Let me summarize what I think I've heard, and then we'll just tell everyone to go and buy the book. It's brilliant. But the bits we've touched on, and there's much more in the book. Methylation is a thing that the body needs to do. Homocysteine levels, if they're high, destroy methylation. One of the best ways to keep your homocysteine under control, B vitamins. The brain is made up of omegas. Look after your omegas. Use it or lose it. I floated a very simple hypothesis that is Alzheimer's really just a metabolic condition, and you went in an essence that's part of it, but you said there are other factors like use it or lose it. I really like that. And we discussed that it doesn't need to be that way. We discussed that on your website again, which is called
foodforthebrain.org.
Foodforthebrain.org. You can go on and do a test, which I've done. And you've got 300,000 or 400,000 people that have already done it. You'll be collecting some good data on that. Hopefully, eventually, that will help pave the way for the future for people to understand. So I recommend everybody goes and does that. We've discussed that Alzheimer's isn't inevitable if it's in the genes. ep.4, which I've learned isn't as big a marker. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've not been paranoid about it, because in my book I go, it's like the gun might be loaded for Alzheimer's, but my lifestyle, my diet's going to pull the trigger. So I haven't been paranoid about it, but you've made me even less paranoid about it now, which is great. And I think that's what we've really gone through. The one I love acronyms, as you know. I call it M&Ms. You know, look after your M&Ms, but not the chocolate. You want in your later years your movement and your mind. If you can keep your movement and your mind going, that's the two.
Yeah, I say 4 horsemen of the mental health apocalypse.
Go for it.
The B vitamins.
Yeah.
That's the homocysteine, methylation. The brain fats, that's omega-3, but also vitamin D, which you make in sunlight. And the third is sugar. You know, that's the whole metabolic thing. Get it down. Eat fiber. And the fourth is also antioxidants and polyphenols, because they mop up the exhaust fumes of us generating energy from glucose. And that's why, you know, veg and fruit, but fruit, you need to eat it, because when you eat it, you got the fiber. When you drink it, you don't have the fiber. Those are the 4 horsemen of the mental health apocalypse. Yeah,
you introduced me to really understanding antioxidants a few years ago when you were talking about the ORAC scale.
Yeah, that's right.
I learned a lot about that from you, so thank you for that. And it's in a lot of your books. It's in my book as well. So antioxidants, down the sugar, up the fiber, because one's the antidote to the other. Eat less sugar, and if you do have sugar, make sure you got the fiber. B vitamins in particular, the omegas. Awesome, dude. And the antioxidants. Thank you very much. Brilliant book. We're going to promote it. We'll put links to it everywhere. And I know you're going to be back literally here in the same room very, very shortly to talk about my book.
Looking
You're a star,
forward to it.
Patrick.
Thank you.